Today, you'll learn English with the news. We'll read a news article together on how Cuba is under pressure from the US. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. Our headline, Cuba's president lashes out as the country is hit by third blackout this month. So first, let's talk about lash out. So that's the structure because it's a phrasal verb. So we have our verb lash, which is conjugated in third person singular because the president, he lashes out. And then the preposition that goes with this phrasal verb is, of course, out. So to lash out. And this means to speak or act in a strong, aggressive way. And it's usually in response to something negative that happens. So in this case, as the country is hit by third blackout. So that's what happened. Now here's an example. Remember, this is a verb. The verb is lash, so you need to conjugate it based on the subject and time reference. So here it's in the past simple, maybe last week or yesterday or even earlier today. The team lashed out. Notice that pronunciation, lashed out when they didn't receive a bonus. So this is the negative thing that happened. They worked really hard but didn't receive a bonus, so they lashed out. What? Why aren't we getting a bonus? This is unacceptable. So they speak or act in a strong, aggressive way. And in this case, the negative thing that happened is the country is hit by. So if you're hit by something, this is the passive voice because the country is receiving the action, not doing the action. So the country is hit by, so they experience something negative and they experience it suddenly or forcefully. And then the thing they experience is a blackout. A blackout is a total power loss. Everything goes black because there's no power, and assuming it's nighttime, everything goes black instantly. Blackout. Oh no, there's a blackout. So after the community was hit by a massive storm, there was a blackout. So certainly you could use hit by and blackout with many natural disasters. So by third blackout this month. Don't worry about taking these notes. I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can find the link in the description. Now let's keep reading the article together. On Monday, all of Cuba lost power. So using this all of and then to lose power. So this represents the blackout because remember a blackout is total power loss because it's very common in a natural context for some areas of a community or city to lose power, but not the entire city at the same time. That's very unusual. So it's very common to lose power, but it's unusual to have a blackout. Remember, blackout is complete, total power loss. Okay, so here you can lose power and then lose, this is of course in the past simple, lost. So you might say, oh no, we lost power again. We lost power again. You can absolutely use to lose power. Power represents electricity. It's not very common to say we lost electricity. A native speaker wouldn't generally say that. We would say power instead of electricity. That's very common to lose power. It's also very common to say the power's out again. The power's out again. Now what is this? The power is out again. Okay, just remember that represents is. So the structure is to be out, to be out. And out means that there is no power. Oh no, the power's out again. So on Monday, all of Cuba lost power. It's not clear what caused the blackout. So again, the blackout meaning all of Cuba. And remember, blackout is a noun. So you need an article here, the blackout, because it's a specific power loss. You could say, I hope there isn't a blackout because that just means any blackout. But here you're talking about a specific one, the blackout. The blackout the people of Cuba experienced on Monday. Okay, so you can experience a blackout, you can simply have a blackout, or in my example, there was a blackout. So again, it's just any blackout. And then 2-day functions as the adjective. There was a 2-day blackout after the community was hit by a massive storm. So just like storm is a noun, you need a. Massive is just the adjective that gives more information. Blackout is a noun, so you need an article as well. And your choice of article will depend on the meaning. So in this case, just any blackout.
Are you enjoying this lesson? If you are, then I want to tell you about the Finally Fluent Academy. This is my premium training program where we study native English speakers from TV, movies, YouTube, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, expand your vocabulary with natural expressions, and learn advanced grammar easily. Plus, you'll have me as your personal coach. You can look in the description for the link to learn more, or you can go to my website and click on Finally Fluent Academy. Now let's continue with our lesson.
On Monday, all of Cuba lost power. It's not clear. So something is not clear. It's another way of saying nobody knows, we don't know, the government doesn't know. It's unknown. Those are all alternatives, but it's very common to say it's not clear. It's not clear what caused the blackout, but it comes at a very difficult time. So it being the blackout. But the blackout comes, and that's why this is conjugated with S, because it's it, of course. It comes at a very difficult time. Cuba is having serious problems getting fuel. So here, notice the sentence structure. You can have problems, difficulty, a difficult time. Those are all different sentence structures that you could use, but I'm explaining that because your next verb is in ing. So this sentence structure, to have problems, to have difficulty, to have a difficult time, but you could turn it into a positive, to have an easy time doing something, is a gerund expression. Now here, there's a verb in ing. Why is that? Cuba is having. So this verb in ing is conjugated in the present continuous. But this is your gerund verb because the sentence structure requires it. Let's review an example that sounds positive. With Jennifer's help, I had an easy time understanding this article. So remember, the expression is to have a time, and then you need an adjective. An easy time, a great time, a difficult time, a challenging time, a terrible time. So positive or negative adjective. And then your choice of and depends on the first letter. Well, it's the sound actually. So here we have a vowel sound. So you need an easy time, and then your gerund. Understanding this article. And if that describes you and you find it easy to understand the news when we review it together like this, put that's right, put that's right in the comments so I know you want me to keep making these lessons. Okay, so Cuba is having serious problems getting. Let's review the pronunciation together. Fuel, fuel. So notice there are two sounds, and that's the important part of this pronunciation. Fuel, few. So it's just like the opposite of many, few. Okay, ew, few. And then it's that dark L, so ol, fuel, fuel, fuel. You can shadow my pronunciation using this section of the recording. Let's keep reading. The country is under great pressure. So notice the sentence structure here. We have to be under pressure. And then you can add an adjective, but it's not required. It's very common to just say, I'm sorry I lashed out, but I'm under a lot of pressure right now. So a lot of would be the adjective, but you could just say, I'm sorry I lashed out. I'm under pressure right now. I'm under pressure from my boss. So my boss is the one who is applying the pressure. Pressure meaning there might be a deadline or a strict requirement, and your boss keeps saying, are you doing it? Are you doing it? When am I going to get it? Make sure it's perfect. We need to do this. So you feel pressure, okay? I'm under, so to be under. And so you have to conjugate your verb to be. I was under pressure last week because of a deadline. You don't have to use from someone. You could use the reason why, because of a deadline. But now the project's done and I feel great. The country is under great pressure from the US, with US President Donald Trump threatening to take it. So if you threaten to do something, so here threatening is in the ing form. It functions as the participle, so it just describes the action, but you threaten to do something. So if you threaten to quit, it means that you tell your boss, I'm going to quit. And there's usually some sort of condition. I'm going to quit if you don't stop pressuring me, for example. So threatening to take it. So here, take it is in quotes because these words came out of Donald Trump's mouth. So Donald Trump said, I'm going to take it, or something with these two words specifically. So take it being Cuba. So to me, that sounds like, without knowing what he actually said, based on the context here, to take it, I would assume to take control of it. So to take control of Cuba. And openly threatening to remove Cuba's current government. So again, we know what threatening to do something. Now here, openly, because you can threaten someone privately, but if, let's say my example of the coworker who threatens to quit. Now, privately would be the coworker having a conversation with the boss. Openly would be in a meeting with other people around. So openly is another word for publicly. So Donald Trump maybe said this in a media release. He posted it on X or social media, and openly threatening to remove Cuba's current government. Let's keep reading. Cuba is an island country of about 11 million people located in the Caribbean. Okay, here, about means approximately, of approximately 11 million people. About's a more informal way, but it is extremely common even in news reviews. The US has a long history of trying to pressure Cuba. So if you have a long history of doing something, it means you've been doing that for a long time. So a long history. You can use this even in casual speech, thinking of the TV show Friends. You can say Ross and Rachel have a long history of dating or of breaking up, whatever it might be. So to have a long history of, and then you need your gerund verb, your verb in ing, of trying to pressure Cuba. So remember, before we learned to be under pressure, I'm under pressure. I'm experiencing pressure. But let's put it in the perspective of my boss. So my boss is pressuring me. So the US is pressuring Cuba. That would just be taking the verb to pressure and putting it in the present continuous because it's taking place now. So here, of trying to pressure Cuba. I could simply say my boss is pressuring me. I could continue on and include the action, and then that would be in the infinitive, to finish the report. So here, the US has a long history of trying to pressure Cuba, mainly because Cuba's communist government has strong ties. Here, ties represents connections in the sense of has a strong relationship. So here, ties or connections. Has strong ties to US opponents like Russia and China. The US has had a trade embargo on Cuba since the 1960s. So here we have the, because it's a decade, the 1960s. It means starting in 1960 and continuing on. But if it were just since 1960, there would be no the. So we do the plus S to represent a decade. Otherwise, you just use the specific date. And since, because it's the starting point in time. If it were a duration, for example, 25 years, then you would use for, of course, for 25 years. And it's the present perfect because it started in the past and continues until now. That means, so that being what was just said, the U.S. has had a trade embargo on Cuba since the 1960s. So notice the pronunciation. This might be an unfamiliar word. Embargo, embargo. So this is your stress sound, bar. So the individual sounds are easy, go. But make sure you have the syllable stress, and this is pronounced as embargo. So that means U.S. businesses aren't allowed to sell things to Cuba. So that's what a trade embargo is. Sometimes news articles will provide the definition of terms that are not familiar to an everyday audience. Everyday meaning just your average person. Let's keep reading. Cuba relies on oil for power. Remember, power represents electricity needed to run my computer, my microphone, the lights, everything. So that's power, electricity. Cuba relies on oil for power. So you can rely on someone or something. And this is a great example of something. But it can only produce about 40% of the oil it needs. So it being Cuba. But Cuba can only produce about 40% of the oil it needs. And again, we see about, which means approximately. In the past, Venezuela and Mexico provided much of the country's oil supply. But in early January, so here you can use 3 options to provide a general sense of when without being specific. Specific would be, but on January 5th. So that would be specific. And notice it would be on, but on January 5th. We use in when you just have the month, in January. And here when you have an adjective to describe the month, you still use in. But when you have month, day, then you use on. So, but on January 5th, so that would represent early January. And then we have 2 other options. Do you know what the middle one would be? It wouldn't be middle, it would be mid-January. And then the final one, late January. So early, mid, late, those are your options. And you can use this for a year in early 2026. In late 2026, you can use this for a season. In early summer, we went on vacation. In late summer, so in summer, but that's still pretty general. So in late summer, or in July, on July 30th. Okay, now that would just be the starting date. If you use start end, you would use from July 30th to August 10th or whatever it might be. Now, in written English, you might see the TH or the ST or the RD after because you wouldn't say it as we went on vacation on July 5. That's incorrect. It's the ordinal number on July 5th. So even if you don't write it, you would still pronounce it like that because it's not July 5, it's July 5th. And on a range, you might just see it on the last one. You might see it just on the first one. You might not see it at all. In formal writing, you would see it on both, but in informal writing, it's more flexible. But in early January, the U.S. military, under orders from Mr. Trump, attacked Venezuela and captured its president. So here we saw under to be used with pressure. I'm under pressure means you're receiving that pressure. You're feeling it, you're experiencing it. So to be under orders is that you've received orders from someone else. So maybe a security guard, you're trying to get in, but your pass doesn't work. You're like, please, just let me in. You know I work here. And the security guard says, sorry, under orders. So they're just saying it's not my decision. I have received specific instructions. That would be the orders. I've received specific instructions to operate in a specific way. I'm under orders. So the full sentence structure would be to be under orders, just like to be under pressure. Now, notice it's with the S, it's in the plural form. I wouldn't say I'm under order, under orders. Sorry, I'm under orders to prevent anyone without a pass from entering, which means I'm required. It's not my choice. And previously we saw from and the person to say that's the person who's putting the pressure on you. So I'm under pressure from my boss. So sorry, I'm under orders from my company to prevent anyone without a pass from entering. So you can include that from my company or whoever is giving the orders from my company. And then you can also include more information, and it would just be your infinitive: to prevent, to stop, to allow. Let's keep reading. Since then, so since early January, that would be the then. So you always have to look back and understand what the time reference is or who the subject is. Since then, the US has used threats. So before we saw the US is threatening or Donald Trump is threatening. My coworker threatened to quit, for example. But threats is the noun form. So it would be words of consequence, words of negative consequence, or actions of negative consequence. But to threaten would be to say or to act. So here is just the noun form. Has used threats of tariffs. Ooh. So you could say has threatened to use tariffs, but has used threats of tariffs to prevent any country from selling oil to Cuba. So how has the U.S. used threats? Well, basically by saying if you sell oil to Cuba, you will receive a tariff from the U.S. Now, that's just my interpretation. I don't know what the U.S. actually said, but that would be an example. Let's keep reading. Last Friday, Cuba's president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, said that the country had not secured any oil in 3 months. So to secure something is that you have it in your possession. But we usually use this for something that getting it may be uncertain or out of your control. So for example, I secured the promotion. Because it's out of my control to just go out and buy a promotion, I can't do that. So I wouldn't say I secured this shirt. I would just say I bought the shirt because it's under my control. But I secured the promotion. I secured the client. I got the client because it's out of my control if they say yes or no to working with me. I secured the client. I secured the loan because, again, it's the bank's decision or a private lender's decision to give me the money or not. It's out of my control. So it sounds like it's just out of the country's control. So that's why they use the word secure. So your choice of vocabulary isn't always like, wow, secure is a more formal way of saying buy or get. So I'm going to use it and say, I secured this shirt. But then it will just be confusing because there's no reason to use that word. So it isn't about replacing basic words like buy or get with a more advanced words. It's about understanding the feeling or the emotion or the meaning of that word and deciding what to use strategically. Without oil, Cuba has had more and more blackouts. So we know what this means: total power loss. And they're using the present perfect because it started in the past and continues until now. And it's an unfinished time reference. It can happen again tomorrow, next week, next month, or until this issue is resolved. Cuba has had more and more blackouts. Because there isn't enough gas or diesel fuel, repeat after me, fuel. Because there isn't enough gas or diesel fuel, garbage is piling up. So to pile up means to increase in number. You can use this with my emails are piling up, my dirty dishes are piling up, laundry is piling up. So you can use this with many tasks and to represent that if you don't complete that task, you get more and more. So now you have the unfinished tasks from yesterday and the unfinished tasks from day. So it just keeps increasing and increasing. So garbage is piling up on the streets of Cuba. The government has had to make cuts. So cuts represents reductions, and it usually represents financial reductions in the context of a government. The government has had to make cuts, including limiting school hours because it costs money to run schools. So that would be a financial cut. Including limiting school hours, public transportation, and even some hospital services. So those are the cuts, the financial reduction, and these are the services that were cut. As a result, the citizens are growing increasingly upset. So here, more and more, a more formal way of saying that is increasingly. You could say the citizens are growing more and more upset. Cuba has had more and more blackouts. Well, it depends on the sentence structure because increasingly is an adverb. So if you wanted to use an adverb, you would have to change the sentence structure. So you would say the blackouts in Cuba have been increasing, because you would need an adjective to describe the blackout. So it really depends on the sentence structure. But in this case, you could say more and more are growing more and more upset, and public protests have been emerging. So emerging is another way of saying happening. So if something emerges, it means it happens. You see the people gathering with the signs, for example, which are quite rare in Cuba. So that represents the public protests. Public protests are quite rare in Cuba. So if something is rare, it means it doesn't happen often. And that comes from, you can also think of the adverb of frequency, rarely. So you would say people in Cuba rarely protest. Protests are rare. So rare is an adjective, rarely is an adverb. So just like we talked about here, you need to think about the part of speech. So here, protests are rare, people rarely protest. So that's a great way to practice your English, is take the same meaning but change it around by using different parts of speech. Part of speech is an adjective versus an adverb, for example. And that's the end of the article. So now I'll read the article from start to finish, and you can focus on my pronunciation. Cuba's president lashes out as the country is hit by third blackout this month. On Monday, all of Cuba lost power. It's not clear what caused the blackout, but it comes at a very difficult time. Cuba is having serious problems getting fuel. The country is under great pressure from the U.S., with U.S. President Donald Trump threatening to take it and openly threatening to remove Cuba's current government. Cuba is an island country of about 11 million people located in the Caribbean. The U.S. has a long history of trying to pressure Cuba, mainly because Cuba's communist government has strong ties to U.S. opponents like Russia and China. The U.S. has had a trade embargo on Cuba since the 1960s. That means U.S. businesses aren't allowed to sell things to Cuba. Cuba relies on oil for power, but it can only produce about 40% of the oil it needs. In the past, Venezuela and Mexico provided much of the country's oil supply. But in early January, the U.S. military, under orders from Mr. Trump, attacked Venezuela and captured its president. Since then, the U.S. has used threats of tariffs to prevent any country from selling oil to Cuba. Last Friday, Cuba's president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, said that the country had not secured any oil in 3 months. Without oil, Cuba has had more and more blackouts. Because there isn't enough gas or diesel fuel, garbage is piling up on the streets of Cuba. The government has had to make cuts, including limiting school hours, public transportation, and even some hospital services. As a result, the citizens are growing increasingly upset, and public protests have been emerging, which are quite rare in Cuba.
Amazing job! Do you want to keep learning English with the news? If you do, put let's go, put let's go in the comments. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And here's another lesson I know you'll love. Watch it now.